this up and running. All right, so as a reminder for everybody in here and also everybody online, so I hope you guys are watching the videos. Final paper is due 1 week from today, next Monday. So if you're going to do the second paper, that's when it's due. But again, as a reminder, I do drop 1 grade. So if you're doing okay so far on your grades and you did the first paper, that one can be dropped. If you need a grade drop, I suggest you do that paper. Or if you didn't do the first one, well, if you didn't do the first one, you need a grade drop. So, yeah. So just FYI, that's next Monday. And then after that, well, the Monday after that will be our review day. So we'll still be able to squeeze in a little bit more material next Monday. Yeah. Wait. Yes. Am I, am I, wait, is my brain right? Calendars, trying to hold a calendar in my head doesn't work. Yeah, because we have Monday and Tuesday next week before Thanksgiving break. That's right. I was thinking before the finals. Right. So yeah, we got Monday and Tuesday next week. So for us, what next Monday will be the final paper, and we'll finish whatever notes we have, and then the Monday after that will be final day of classes, which will be for us. It's just review day. So yeah, any questions from you guys about anything? 24th. Yeah. Yep. Next Monday is when the papers due. Okay, it says my video's up, so that's good. And then again, the exam, my exam days are Wednesday and Friday, in here at 8:30 to 10:30. I think our day is actually that Wednesday. If that is a problem for your schedule, you're welcome to come in that Friday. Again, for you online folks, don't worry about it. I'm going to put it online just like I do all the other tests. If you have an issue with how the online tests are working, come into the continuum and you can take it here. But, let me know. That's all I can think. Any other questions from you guys? And again, just as a reminder, the final's going to just be another test. It's not going to be anything different. Yeah, so I'm going to see if I can get us through chapter 8 and 9 before the final. So I won't have to adjust my final too much from what I've already got. So chapter 8 is New Frontiers, 1790 to 1820. When I put it in the title, PowerPoint's like, hey, here's a suggestion for your title page. And like, well, that's not really what I'm going for, but you know what? PowerPoint, since you suggested it, that's what I'm going to do. And so there it is. A man presumably on the moon. I don't know, though. Since it's got clouds, I'm guessing that's supposed to be Mars? I don't freaking know. That's too much clouds even for Mars. So I don't know what's going on here. We are not on the moon or Mars. We are heading west. Like, sort of. Anyway, let's just start with, now that we've got a constitution, we've got some level of a stable government. No, Webster. Start working on the American Spelling Book, standardized spelling and pronunciation of words that were commonly used in America. By 1810, this was the second best-selling book in the U.S. This is why our words are spelled differently from British English. Just because of Noah Webster's like, oh, well, we're a different nation, so we're going to spell things different. It's just as this dude's fault. Now, granted, there wasn't really like a standardized spelling or pronunciation of words yet. It was just sort of dependent on the region. So this was just sort of a taking what had already changed a little bit due to distance and time and making it, quote, the official spelling and pronunciation of the U.S. So that's why, a lot of, if you have seen British spelling, pronunciation is, obviously that's a whole other thing. Like, we took out a lot of U's, we changed S's to Z's, that sort of thing. Yeah. And then in 1828, he published the American Dictionary of the English Language, which just is Webster's dictionary. Again, you guys have probably had to get one of these every freaking year when you start a new grade, and you probably almost never use it. In 1789, Massachusetts instituted free elementary education. They were the first state to do this, so there was some level of education for, I wouldn't say everyone, we'll get to that in a minute, but at least for most people. Well, again, white children, men. But at the very least, it meant that, like, you didn't have to have money to have some level of education. And again, elementary education, it's like reading and writing and real basic math, which is kind of all you really needed at the time, unless you were going for, like, lawyer school. There were 9 colleges that existed in the U.S. prior to the Revolution, but a lot of Americans felt like they had been tainted by their British origins, even though, like, Harvard's still considered the top university in America, and it's very much a British university. But whatever. So frontier towns, which again, when we're talking about the frontier, we mean like western portions of current eastern states, started becoming models for these newer colleges. But of course, colleges need land, and in these frontier areas, the land still belonged to the natives, so they continued pushing natives off their land. Because of course. One such college, at least a specific example that the book uses, is Franklin College in Athens, Georgia. This was specifically situated for groups outside of the typical Anglo-Americans, such as Scots-Irish Presbyterians, who were, I wouldn't say, mistreated in America, but they certainly weren't given the same opportunities as Anglo-Americans. If you're not proper British stock, you're not treated with the same level of respect. So at least down in Franklin College, Scots-Irish Presbyterians were able to gain more education and make more of a mark on the country. So there's Noah Webster being very old. This is a really nice picture of Franklin College. The design, just the architecture of the college reminds me of Providence College up in Rhode Island. And the fact that they took this picture during the fall it just immediately makes me think again of Providence College. And when I see this picture, I think, oh, it's a nice crisp autumn day, but it's in Georgia, so this image could be 45 degrees or 75 degrees, depending on the day. Because it's no better than us. Okay, this next slide, it got a little bit crowded, so the title is kind of smushed up into the border there. Literary and cultural developments. Because I didn't want to split it into two because it's just enough. So, let's just get into these. So with these new colleges, they created a new literary tradition that was specifically American. Now, granted, it was mostly Federalist because the Federalists were still kind of the ones in power. They were the ones that were still like in control of the cities where most of the population was. They were considered the ones that were the elite, the ones that had all the education and power. So this new literary tradition, such as, for example, the Hartford Wits, were largely Federalist in terms of their political leaning. So the Hartford Wits, they largely were graduates from Yale. They pushed this idea. This is when novels once again became popular. And if you're familiar at all with any level of history, you will know that anytime novels become popular, it's women that are pushing that popularity, women that are doing the reading. It's what was the other two things? Like every culture has like some kind of fried dough food, some kind of alcoholic drink, and anytime there's novels, women are the ones that are doing all the reading, even though they're like, unable to use their brains for things because of the culture, but they're the ones that are always doing the reading, and oftentimes a lot of the writing. But of course, they have to use pseudonyms because women can't write. Speaking of writers, we had Washington Irving, who was quite popular. He wrote Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which we should all be at least somewhat familiar with, as well as Rip Van Winkle. And I mentioned Legend of Sleepy Hollow before. Both of these were taking place in like the Hudson River Valley, where a lot of Dutch immigrants had settled. So that region was sort of like a little Netherlands. It was, well, like I said, when it came to, if you read Sleepy Hollow, it feels almost European because the culture there is so heavily Dutch. He also wrote some other more serious stuff than just like, ooh, headless Hessians booping around the woods. Challenged accounts of conflicts between the natives and English, because it was always like either, oh, the savage natives attacked us and we had to valiantly defend ourselves, or we bravely murdered an entire village of natives that didn't fight back, but it was totally their fault anyway. And Washington Irving's like, yeah, this don't add up. So he was challenging these accounts. I mean, this, again, really early in America's lifetime, people were already like, yeah, this ain't exactly adding up, guys. Already we had books glorifying the past of the nation, considering we were all of like 10, 20 years old at this point. Mercy Otis Warren wrote the History of the American Revolution. Okay, again, it was like 20 years ago. Mason Parson Weems. The book specifically says here, The Life of Washington, a celebratory, if somewhat fanciful biography by an Anglican clergyman. Yeah, so we're already sort of like yeah, mythicizing our founding fathers. I don't remember what year it was that Washington died, so I don't know if he was even dead at this point. That like we were getting a biography of Washington that was already kind of more myth than reality. So there were some historical themes with the art. Um, Charles William Peel painted many portraits of Washington. I mean, we've got tons from this era. Um, Samuel Jennings painted Liberty Displaying the Arts and Sciences, which I'll have a picture of, which is also in the book somewhere. I thought it was in the book. Is it not in the book? It'd be wild if they didn't put it in the book. Huh. Maybe it's at the end of the book. Anyway, or the end of the chapter. Which specifically was this personification of Lady Liberty, not the Statue of Liberty, that comes much later, but this idea of like this personification of America, but specifically offering books to African Americans in addition to like symbols of learning, which certainly upset some people who weren't too keen on treating humans as humans because of the whole everything going on. There are some other details in the picture that I'll bring up when we get to it. Scientific engravings. Had Cleveland's treatise on mineralogy and geology, engravings of rock formations. William Bartram's travels. He went to Florida and illustrated all this different stuff he was seeing there. The book again mentions where is it at? Oh, too far along. Oh, here we are. When Bartram's travels, based on his journey through southeastern United States and Florida, illustrated plants and animals such as the alligator, previously unknown to Anglo-American scientists. Yeah, imagine seeing an alligator for the first time. That'd be a little bit exciting. Now, granted, at least they're much more chill than their crocodile cousins, but still, angry log. I couldn't find a more contemporary Sleepy Hollow title, so there you go. Here's the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Here is one of, which one is it? William Peel's Portraits of Washington. And again, lots of symbolism. You've got different flags of the different nations that were helping us out. You can see this one, I believe, is Prussia, Belgium. I'm not sure what this is. Is that one of our old flags? There's a lot going on. A lot of symbolism in this image. And then, speaking of symbolism, here is Lady Liberty displaying the arts and sciences. So again, she has books here, symbols of literally the arts, history, and these are just like literally schematics and stuff, telescope, and she is basically teaching them to what would at the time have been slaves, which certainly upset slave owners. But there's another symbol in this image that I've shown you guys a while back that is really blatant when it comes to slavery. Does anybody recognize it? That specifically was used a lot during the Revolution with the whole like, oh, we're going to break free from slavery from Britain. And then they're like, oh, wait, maybe we shouldn't use this thing because we're still keeping slaves. Not, it wasn't a chain. It's right there in the. It's pretty prominently displayed in the picture. It's an old Roman symbol. I have only shown it to you guys once before, so I don't blame you. The Phrygian cap. It was they had that in one of the old protest pictures back before the war. Like, oh, we got to be free of this economic slavery under Britain and blah, 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 blah. But here, this is pretty obvious implication when it's the symbol of America giving education to an enslaved class of people with this right here over her shoulder. So it's not just implying, hey, we should educate these people, but also they shouldn't be slaves. Yeah. I mean, and then also, obviously the chains would also be the implication of, hey, we've gotten our freedom, but not everybody else. Speaking of, racism. This is America. But when it came to Native Americans, they were often used as subjects for the various writers and scientists who were discussing, like, America as an ideal, I guess is the best way to word that. So a lot of times Americans who would protest either economic or political issues would dress as Native Americans, like we have with the Boston Tea Party, riders in the Hudson River Valley, the Whiskey Rebellion, squatters in Maine would disguise themselves as Native Americans, which again was more of a, I'll just bring this next one up. It was more of a statement. Because apparently, these groups call themselves Tammany societies, named after the Delaware chief Tammand. This promoted patriotism and republicanism, even though, like, they were trying to wipe out these various native tribes. But apparently this idea of, oh, look at these people who are living wild and free on the frontier and doing their own thing and not living under the tyranny of Britain. That's so noble, and we should honor that and want to be like them, at least to some degree. Obviously they're still savages and not civilized or whatever. So like they took these ideas that they saw in the natives as something that they liked, while still destroying them. So we did have some people at this time who were aware of what was happening. This wasn't just, oh wow, these natives are pretty cool. Let's, take symbols. Let's appropriate their culture that we like while still genociding them. We had individuals like Philip Freneau, I don't know. He wrote the poem Indian Burying Ground, which basically was bemoaning the lost heritage of the cultures that were either already wiped out or being wiped out. Because when you've got these people, these tribes, that have been essentially on the run for the last 200 years, their culture is already pretty much gone. You don't have all the old. I mean, sure, they've got some of their old ways that they've carried with them, but like the minutia of their their rights and um, you know, I'm blanking on the word, rituals and the stuff that they would do before they were being chased out of their homes with guns. That's all gone. You're going to leave that behind when you're running for your life. And after generations, they're going to forget it because most of them don't have written language. So that's going to be just forgotten over the generations. And yeah, this poem by Philip Freneau is just like, yeah, we've really messed this we really messed this up. We have wiped out cultures, entire cultures of people, um, by expanding the way we have. But all that said, even as positive as some of the views were when it came to Native Americans, and even with the liberty displaying the arts and sciences, these were all views from whites when it came to Native Americans and African Americans because they were typically the only ones who had the opportunity to get education and have the opportunity to write about these sorts of things, or, in the case of the portrait, have these levels of skill for painting and whatnot, or at the very least have it paid attention to. I'm sure there was lots of art that was done by natives and African Americans that were just cast aside and destroyed because, oh, well, they're not civilized. Some Native Americans were allowed to enroll in schools, but only as ministers so they could go back to their tribes to convert them. So not in any kind of capacity to reflect on the state of things. So certainly not any kind of philosophical or mathematical or engineering jobs, just to become ministers to convert their tribes. When it came to African Americans, especially in the South, because obviously, they were discouraged from getting any kind of education. And by discouraged, I mean in a lot of places it was just against the law. And in the North, where that was not against the law, when the government did create actual public schools, they just weren't included in the plans. It wasn't that they were specifically left out. They just weren't thought about at all. Because again, this is 1700s, 1800s America. We're not really too concerned about anybody but white men. So when it came to African Americans attempting to get any kind of education, they pretty much had to work together and do it for themselves. And a lot of times it was through the African Methodist Church, because, well, if you're going to be a minister, you have to have, you typically have some level of education, and that was a place where lots of people gather. And if you have a place where lots of people gather and at least a few people there with education, you can spread that education. So that was usually the place to get any kind of education back then as an African American, was through the local church. If your town had a local church that would allow African Americans, because again, it's the 1800s. So the main difference, at least for white Americans when it came to their views, is that Native Americans were uncivilized, but they could at least be educated, whereas Africans were seen as inferior because of the whole slavery thing. Because for white Americans, Native Americans were like, they were a moral problem because they're living out in the countryside doing just fine until we get there and start tearing stuff up. But then it's like, oh, well, they just need our help. They just need a hand to become civilized. You know, we got to send our missionaries out to convert them. Whereas with the slaves we're bringing over from Africa, we can't do that because then we'll have enslaved fellow Christians, and we don't want to worry about that. So we need to not do the moral thinking on that end because of the whole economics of slavery. So that's why. And as I mentioned to my Tuesday, Thursday class, had the whole like disease thing not happened with the Native Americans, had when Europeans came over, Native Americans just not died by the thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions just due to disease. For one, they probably would have been able to put up a better fight because they wouldn't all have been dead. But they probably would have been the ones enslaved. We wouldn't have had to import people from another freaking continent. And so they would have been the ones that would have been like, oh, well, they're just naturally inferior because racism. And so that would have been the argument here. But since we couldn't enslave Native Americans for the simple fact that they died from being around Europeans, it's like, oh, well, they're just uncivilized. Yeah. So that's what that's about. Here is, Philip Freneau, hanging out with natives trying to get what he felt like were, the last vestiges of their culture. Luckily, they managed to survive to some degree to the modern day, but man, their cultures have been really destroyed. All right, a bit more with, well, this is kind of a weird blip because it shows up and then it goes away, but this is an idea that will come up later, so we're going to mention it here also because it's in the book, so yeah. Immigration and colonization. And again, immigration spelled with an E is people moving out of a country. So yeah. We had the Newport African Union Society. This was a Rhode Island group back in the 1780s, wanted to establish a community for American blacks in Africa. So the idea was along these were, I don't remember if Wim Thornton was, I think, Wim Thornton was part of the Newport African Union Society. Anyway, he inherited a sugar plantation and therefore had a ton of money and worked with a group in London to establish this free black commonwealth on the west coast of Africa. The idea was they basically just like buy up a bunch of land in Western Africa and send back a bunch of, and by send back, I mean, send the African Americans who had been born here for the last like 2-3 generations, because we weren't really importing that many anymore. But hey, all Africans are basically the same, right? We'll just send them over, even if they were born and have lived here their entire lives. So we had folks like the Free African Society in Philadelphia that didn't like these ideas. And again, I'll get to that a bit more in a minute. Let's call this colonization because they were literally going to make a colony in West Africa. Black Americans called this immigration because they were going to immigrate to Africa. So we had the American Colonization Society. This was in the South. Southern slave owners and northern merchants, they wanted to carry civilization and Christianity to Africa by establishing this colony of free blacks. So not only were they having a place to send former slaves to, but also use that to spread Christianity through Africa, because it was always this like missionary call as an excuse for what they were doing. So while there were some freed blacks in America who did support this, others, typically in the North, who were allowed to get an education, saw this as coming from, quote, more from prejudice than philanthropy, because it was there to ease racial tensions by getting rid of black people entirely. Because you can't have racism against black people if they're not in the country. So, yeah, it's kind of obvious once you look at it from that direction. It's like, oh yeah, let's send all these people that we're being horribly racist against to just like another continent. That's fine. Yeah. However, none of this actually came to fruition, because after the 1790s, the cotton gin happened. Cotton production rapidly increased, and Southern slave owners were very much unwilling to free their slaves because, well, there was money to be made. So all of this kind of came to nothing. However, these ideas were still around. We'll talk about them more, I think, next semester. But this idea of like returning to Africa sticks around for a little bit. So, this is the Newport African Union Society in Rhode Island. And this is, I can tell this is Rhode Island because the roads are so damn uneven. Like, you're up here and then it's just completely downhill. It was an awful place to drive. Free African Society, established under the leadership of Richard Allen. So, we remember him. Office of the Colonization Society, which, like, that feels weird, right? The American Colonization Society, we had just fought Britain as we were colonies and became our own country, and now we're creating a colonization society. That, I don't know, it feels like that'd be kind of against our thing. All right. On to the national capital. Which, again, there's a lot here, so it got kind of squished up there, but whatever. The capital was not called Washington, D.C. to begin with. It was called Washington City. So, just FYI. Built mostly by enslaved men, because, of course, along the Potomac River. Again, it's where D.C. is now. It's just the name changed after the War of 1812. Now, there were free blacks that were hired on, so some people were being paid, though not much, and they were often working the same jobs as the slaves, so nobody was enjoying the work. We did have individuals such as Benjamin Banneker. He was a self-taught African-American clockmaker, astronomer, and surveyor, so he was overqualified. But, due to melanin, he was only able to serve as an assistant to Major Andrew Elcott, who plotted the area to build the Capitol. So, I mean, I guess as assistant to, like, the main guy is still a pretty high position, but he probably could have done it himself. We also had a lot of Irish immigrants out doing the work, but due to the fact that slave labor was being used to build the Capitol, their wages were kept very, very low, because if you're using literal slaves to do the work and you're coming in as a wage laborer, your wages are going to be extremely low because you're literally competing against people who aren't being paid at all. And regardless of who you were, well, not so much who you were. If you were one of these top guys, it wasn't as bad. Um, but whether you were African American or Irish or whatever other immigrants we had in there dying in the swamp, um, the housing they had set up for the workers was extremely dismal. Um, the food there was sparse at best, and very, very little medical care for any injuries that occurred during the building. And then, of course, the rampant malaria because they're in a damn swamp. Oop. So while Washington City was meant to be this symbol of a new nation, most of the experts that actually came to build it were from Europe. We had Pierre Lefont, a French engineer who laid out the streets, James Hoban, Irish designer who worked on the Executive Mansion, William Thornton, who designed the Capitol building. I think he was also Irish. The book doesn't specifically say, so I guess since he's mentioned after... oh, no, he was West Indian, which is to say from the West Indies. So, I guess technically English. Benjamin Latrobe was an English architect. You guys don't need to know all these names. I'm just showing you, by the way. These are all people from not America. And despite the fact that, like, they were using what was pretty much the cutting-edge technology of the day, we're still in a damn swamp. And there's not much you can do about that. I'll read here from the book. Washington's founders envisioned the city as a beacon to the world, proclaiming advances of Republican principles, but its location on a slow-moving river and its clay soil left the area hot, humid, and dusty in the summer and muddy and damp in the winter and spring. When John Adams and his administration moved to Washington in June of 1800, they considered themselves on the frontiers of civilization. Mile-long road from Capitol to the Executive Mansion was filled with tree stumps and was nearly impossible to navigate on the carriage. On rainy days, when roads proved impassable, officials walked or rode horses to work. When Abigail Adams moved in November, she complained that the roof leaked, the house was too hard to heat, firewood was difficult to obtain. Founders considered it an experiment in Republican simplicity, while others, such as the New Hampshire representative, wrote, "If I wished to punish a culprit, I would send him to do penance in this place, this swamp, this lonesome, dreary swamp, secluded from every delightful or pleasing thing." Others described the city as a fever-stricken morass. So, yeah, Washington was off to a good start. And this is the map I showed you guys before. Of just the fact that it's on the convergence of two slow-moving rivers, which means, again, it's in a swamp. And then I just have a couple pictures of these various guys. Lafont. Oh, no, I just have Lafont. Never mind. Now, this is building during 1860. Which you can see here. So this is much newer, but it's still swampy. Look at that. That's not pleasant ground there. And I remember seeing on I think it was like a Weather Channel special, that if a hurricane went up the Potomac, it would push the storm surge up and would just completely flood DC. Like there would be no, you would just have to leave. There would be nothing you could do. You could not stop the water from just completely inundating the city. Because again, it's all this is low lying, and you just push the water up the river, and all of this is underwater now. So again, Jefferson won the election of 1800, and as he began, he started limiting the reach of the federal government, which, was the thing that Jefferson was running on. That was his whole thing was, well, we're not going to do what the Federalists are doing. We're going to make the government smaller, repeal the whiskey tax, let the Alien Sedition Acts expire, because I guess apparently you don't just repeal those, you just wait on them to go out of date, and you just don't make them come back. Albert Gallatin, he worked with the Whiskey Rebels as a lawyer. Jefferson appointed him as Secretary of Treasury to reduce government expenditures. We will come back to Gallatin. He is very important in later things that Jefferson's going to be doing around the U.S. So, yeah, Secretary of Treasury Albert Gallatin, I would argue almost as important as President Jefferson himself when it comes to Jefferson's presidency. However, there were some issues early on. We had the Barbary States of North Africa, which was a massive pirate confederation. Again, I'll show you guys the map in a minute. But basically, like, all of North Africa minus Egypt was basically controlled by pirates. Today we have, Somalian pirates, and they attack, cargo ships and stuff. These pirates were so bad that we, and by we I mean not just America, but like countries in Europe, would just pay them money to leave us alone because they were so powerful you couldn't do anything about it. Jefferson did have the U.S. work with the Ottoman Empire to try to capture Tripoli, which was the capital of like one of the Barbary states. And while we did manage to do some damage, it only resulted in us not having to pay as much to the pirates to get them to leave us alone. So we certainly didn't stop them. Which I know is kind of crazy thinking of like America post World War II of being just like the world superpower. But yeah, we were paying off pirates to leave us alone. There was also the revolution in Haiti. The slaves in the French colony of Saint-Dominique rose in rebellion. They first worked with the British and Spanish against the French. However, when Napoleon took over, he basically told them, hey, if you work with us against the British and Spanish, then we'll allow you to be part of the Republic. So they did. They pushed the British and Spanish back off of Haiti. Toussaint Louverture became president of the Haiti Republic. However, Napoleon decided that he wanted Haiti back. Louverture was captured and died in prison. But Haiti would not go so easily, and eventually was granted independence in 1803. Well, it was granted independence in January of 1804. It officially became Haiti as the first black-led nation in the Americas. Though I would like to mention that if you've seen anything on Haiti in the news in like the last 5 years, it's always about like how poor and corrupt it is and how the infrastructure is falling apart. Yeah, that's because as soon as Haiti became independent, every major power in the world economically starved them. You know how, like, whenever Russia does something, which is, again, every other week, it's like, oh, well, we're going to put sanctions on Russia and cut them off of blah, blah, blah. But they're like this massive country with all these allies that they can get stuff from anyway, so it's like a slap on the wrist. When you're a tiny island out in the middle of the Caribbean and you're getting hit by Category 5 hurricanes every other year, and then every country in the world treats you like you're some war criminal, you're doomed from the start. That's why their economy is gone. That's why they're in as bad a shape as they're in. And we also like sent the CIA in to like try to overthrow their government at least twice. So that's why Haiti is in such bad shape, because every other country, and by every other country I mean like America and the main ones in Europe, um, economically strangle them, because we can't have a black-led nation. Can't do that. It's not allowed. So if you ever hear somebody talking shit about Haiti, this is why. It's not their fault. You can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps if you don't have boots. Anyway, this is the Barbary States. Again, that's a lot of land for some damn pirates. Well, granted, they were mostly just on the cities on the coast because, you know, pirates and water and whatnot. But still, that's a lot. Because, you know, this is Egypt over here, Alexandria and Cairo and whatnot. But yeah, that's a lot. Meanwhile, in Haiti, they were treating their former French slave owners fairly. If you recall, the normal way you hang someone is you put them on a platform and put the rope around their neck, and then you open the platform and it drops them and breaks their neck. This is considered an improper way of hanging them, which is to say they suffer. You can see this man is kicking. Obviously, this is the desired effect for what's happening here. And they've been doing it a lot. But, you know, this isn't a clean execution idea here. They're getting revenge for hundreds of years of slavery. So, you know, but this is also what the southern states feared. This was that fear manifest was, well, if we let our slaves go, they're just going to murder us. It's like, well, these guys got free on their own, and the French kind of had it coming, so, you know. Also, here's Toussaint L'Ouverture. He was quite the dapper dresser. I don't know what's with this sword, though. That sword doesn't look real. It's like some kind of crazy future sword. All right. Speaking of the French, apparently at some point between the last time we talked about Louisiana and here, it switched over from the Spanish to the French again. I don't know when it happened. It might have been during the French Revolution and Napoleon. I don't know. But regardless, Louisiana is now under the control of the French again. So Thomas Jefferson sent James Monroe to France with $2 million to request that we can use the Mississippi again, because since it's French territory again, our old treaty with Spain didn't apply. However, I feel like this might have been after Trafalgar, which is to say France's entire fleet was destroyed. And Napoleon's like, hey, so we can't get to Louisiana right now, so how about we just sell you the whole damn thing for $15 million? And considering how much land that was, I think it even out, or it divided out to like 2 cents an acre. Real good deal. So for me, normally it's just like, hey, France sold us Louisiana, cool, we've got all this land, you get Lewis and Clark doing their thing, which we'll talk about here in just a second, the end. But because we've been talking about the Federalists and Democratic Republicans and the whole, like, Constitution thing, we get a little bit of humor here, because technically the Constitution didn't have anything in it about buying land from a foreign nation. And Jefferson was very, very strict about following the word of the Constitution. So if the Constitution does not specifically say you can do something, then you can't do it. If he was a Federalist, if the Constitution doesn't say you can't do something, then it's cool. So Jefferson agonized over this. It's a great deal. There's no strings attached. We're just going to get all this land for what is essentially a pittance. Napoleon can use the money, but we're not worried about what Napoleon's doing. That's their business. We're going to get all this land. It's going to help out a ton. Also, it's going to get France off our borders. So, like, we don't even have to worry about, like, the French on our borders anymore. So he finally pushed through and was like, okay, well, I guess we'll make this purchase. Nobody else in the government cared. Which is to say, nobody else in the government was against it. Everybody was totally on board with it. Everybody in the government, regular citizens, they're like, yeah, this is a great idea. Why? Well, what's the problem, Jefferson? He was the only one who agonized about it. And, you know, historically speaking, that's kind of funny. Because, like, that's one of Jefferson's, that's considered one of his greatest achievements, is getting the Louisiana Purchase, but he was the only one who was like, oh, I don't know, man, this is kind of, it's not really, what the Constitution doesn't allow it. And everybody else is like, Jefferson, come on. Nobody's going to be upset with this. So anyway, Coral Discovery, exploratory expedition, Lewis and Clark, we know all this. They were led by the natives of Sacagawea, great. Other natives traveled along with him as well to help them with baggage and horses and whatnot. Also, this one you guys may not know, because I didn't know it until I got to this part. There was a slave named York who was a scout under Clark, and once they got back from the expedition, he gained his freedom. The book specifically says he gained his freedom. I don't know if that meant... Yeah, the book does say, York did eventually become a free man, but it is not clear whether it was by Clark's choice or because York escaped. So I don't know if they, like, got back and Meriwether Clark's like, yo, you did a great job. You're clearly worth more than just, like, a slave. Here's your freedom. Or if York's like, screw this, I'm out of here, and just, like, got the hell out. I don't know. But either way, York was very important in the expedition as well. Since everybody should know about the Lewis and Clark expedition, I'm not going to talk too much about it. What I am going to talk about is Zebulon Pike, for one reason, because I like the name. It just rolls off the tongue. He had a different expedition. He went along the Rocky Mountains and then down towards Mexico. And, well, there's two reasons why I like to talk about Zebulon Pike. One, again, the name rolls off the tongue. Also, he got captured by Mexican forces because he crossed into Mexico. Oops. However, we didn't have any issues with Mexico at the time, surprisingly, because America was really good at having issues with everybody. So they just, like, walked him through Mexican territory and just, like, let him go in Louisiana here. I'll get to that in just a minute. Anyway, here's Louisiana Purchase, by the way, since we're doing the images already. See, that was like, it almost doubled the amount of land we had, just for $15 million, which, again, is almost nothing, relatively speaking. So by the time Pike got back to America, he had kind of made friends with the Mexican forces that had captured him, because, again, they weren't like, this wasn't a military a hostile action. They were just like, hey, you're in the wrong place. You got to get out of here. We're going to escort you back to where you need to be. So they were just like talking. By the time they got there, they apparently had gotten so comfortable with him, they had mentioned to him that, oh, by the way, we're planning on just like overthrowing Spain. We're going to overthrow Spanish rule here in Mexico. And also, while they were walking through, he was able to get a pretty good idea of what is essentially now southwestern United States, because, again, all this was technically Mexican territory at the time. Well, Spanish territory, but under what is now Mexico. So yeah, they just, like, he got called, I don't know, here or something, and so they just strolled through, and then, let him go over here, rather than putting him back through here, which at the time was still very much frontier. He's like, why don't we get you guys over, like, near a city, so you won't have to be out in the middle of nowhere anymore. Lewis and Clark expedition, Sacagawea, that whole thing. There's York. Again, it looks like a children's book. That's the best I could find, but I'm glad that, hey, at least he's getting some amount of exposure. Here we go. So Pike made his way from St. Louis, named Pike's Peak because, again, very, very humble guy. Made his way south, got captured at some point. Actually, they did go all the way into modern-day Mexico before they brought him up to, however that's pronounced, in what is modern-day Louisiana. So, yeah. Despite not being an especially successful expedition, he did get a lot done, which was good for him and for America. So I like old Pike. All right. Let's get a little further along, since we still have about 10 minutes left, and I want to try to get as much done as I can. So even though Jefferson was, again, a strict constitutionalist, the Supreme Court was gaining strength during this period. At the end of Adams' presidency, he added more power to the Supreme Court to have a last, place for Federalist power to maintain its hold during Jefferson's presidency. We had the Judiciary Act, created 6 additional court judges and 16 new judgeships. 6 additional circuit courts, and therefore 16 new judges, which Adams filled, which resulted in the Marbury v. Madison, because James Madison wouldn't accept Adams' commission. So even as far back as 1803, we had assholes not doing their job and not accepting judges that were fairly elected. Well, not even fairly elected. This was a law that was passed right before the next president came in just to pack the court. So I kind of can see Madison not being on board with this. But this is when the Supreme Court came in, said it could not force the executive branch to give commissions, but it did have the duty to say what the law was, which is like what the Supreme Court does now. It's like this whole thing is to say what the law is. And then also claim the next year to be able to rule on the constitutionality of state laws. So it now no longer was just a federal law body, but can now rule over state laws, which, again, at the time was like a major increase of power for the Supreme Court. McCulloch v. Maryland, again, interpretation of the Constitution's implied powers, which is to say, it was this whole thing over the National Bank where Maryland was trying to, here we go. Sorry, Maryland was trying to tax the branch banks of the National Bank, and Congress or the court said that the power to tax involves the power to destroy. Basically, Maryland would have the ability to tax the branch banks of the federal government out of existence, and they weren't allowed to do that. And also, despite the Democratic Republicans opposing the First National Bank, they actually chartered the Second National Bank in 1816. So despite not wanting to have a national bank to begin with, when time came to either let the bank expire or charter a second one, they decided that the bank was too important to the stability of America and chartered a second one. So the Democratic Republicans are quickly discovering that while maybe the Federalists were overreaching with their power, some of this was still pretty important to maintaining a stable government. And then we also have the judicial review power, which allowed the court to rule on cases that involve states and the nation, which again is just anytime you hear about like people appealing cases that go all the way to the Supreme Court, that's what this is. So, again, the Judiciary Act created more judges, maintain control of the judiciary branch, and then the whole like Marbury v. Madison thing. It was a split decision, or no, it was a unanimous decision. Whereas if there's a split decision, so if there's a 5-4 vote, it still is counted, in favor of whichever side wins. So if it's a 5 yes, 4 no, it's still considered a yes decision. And there's the Maryland thing. And Maryland's like, well, I don't want the bank to tax me. All right. Okay. I know we got 5 minutes left, but I really want to do this last one because it's got a great image, and it's a perfect place to end. So, despite Democratic Republicans wanting to keep the government small, they continue to expand power. We had the Royal Navy impressing more than 8,000 sailors, which, again, we're not in Britain anymore. They're just taking our guys. France and England were still at war. This was still Napoleon. England claimed that deserters were leaving the Royal Navy, so they were looking for deserters on American ships. And again, Americans and English or British were basically still the same. You couldn't tell just by how they talked yet. So we had the Embargo Act in 1807. U.S. ships could not leave ports until Britain and France ended their own trade restrictions, which really hurt trade. If U.S. ships couldn't leave port, we couldn't trade with anybody. But especially merchants in New England who obviously lived on trading things. So some of them smuggled goods through Canada because, as we've seen, when you restrict trade, people just find a way around it. So Congress responded with the Force Act, which was essentially the same thing that Britain did, which is to say, hey, you want to get around the law we've got by smuggling? Cool, we're going to send troops in so you can't do that. Merchants weren't the only ones that suffered from this. Farmers, planters, urban workers, and sailors and dock workers. I mean, there's so much of our economy that is focused on, not just our economy, but world economy that focuses on trade. I mean, again, we saw just a few years back when the Suez Canal got blocked, and it really screwed the world economy for a week there, and everybody was freaking out. Yeah. So needless to say, there was a lot of resentment towards Jefferson over this, who not only failed to keep the government from expanding, because again, all this is expansion of government, but also was hurting the livelihood of the people that he claimed to be working for. So, yeah, it wasn't great. Also, the image that I want to show you guys, because it's in the book, but it's great. It's the embargo turtle. And it's called Ograbme. Or Grab Me, I don't know. It's embargo spelled backwards. And this was like a thing. This wasn't just a one-off. The embargo turtle called Ograbme was like a well-known thing in this era. So yeah, the embargo turtle is stopping the guy from shipping sugar off to Britain. Yep, that's the thing. All right, we'll get into the next section next time. We probably actually ought to be able to finish the chapter next time because of how quickly I was able to push through this stuff. And start chapter 9 so we can finish chapter 9 next week. Cool, great, we're on task. I'll see y'all on Wednesday.